Yay. Small portion of our program. Okay. Gonna gavel in. Carrie, are you ready? Just confirming that we're ready. Great. All right. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach, the District 8 City Councilor. I'm the chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Ways and Means. Joined here today by my colleagues, Councilor Flynn of District 2, Councilor Edwards of District 1, Councilor Flaherty at large, Councilor Mejia at large, Councilor O'Malley of District 6, Council President Janey of District 7, Councilor Asabi George at large, Councilor Liz Breeden of District 9, Councilor Arroyo of District 8, 5, my apologies. I believe that's everyone who's, Councilor Frank Baker of District 3, and I believe that's everyone who's joined us so far. This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv. It'll be rebroadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, Verizon Channel 1964. This hearing, one moment. This hearing represents the launch of the Council's FY21 budget review process. And that'll encompass approximately 27 hearings over roughly 6 weeks. Because it's the first such hearing, I would like to make a few orienting remarks for everyone watching back at home. This year's budget process is coming in the midst of great uncertainty as our city grapples with the challenges of COVID-19. This crisis will have enormous impacts on the budget for next year and the years to come, both in terms of government revenues and in terms of the needs we must meet for the people of Boston. Already, the needs for food access, housing support, and business assistance are huge and only growing. So more than ever before, we can expect this year's budget to be a work in progress, one that may have to significantly change over the next few months. Nonetheless, the ongoing situation makes a public budgeting process all the more important. To the extent that we need to shift resources to address urgent problems, or make hard decisions because of more limited revenues, or take action on long-standing inequities and gaps exposed by this crisis, we need a diversity of voices involved in those decisions, both here on the Council and from the public. So we strongly encourage Boston residents and stakeholders to engage in this process by giving testimony for the record. You can do this in several ways. You can email the committee at ccc.wm@boston.gov. That's ccc.wm@boston.gov, or fill out the form on our City Council budget website. This year, you can also submit a 2-minute video of your testimony through the form on our website. You can attend also one of our virtual hearings like this and give public testimony. We'll be taking public testimony at the end of each hearing. When you are called, please state your name and affiliation or residence and limit your comments to a couple minutes to ensure that all comments and concerns can be heard. The Zoom link can be found in the public notice for each hearing. You can also come to one of the 3 hearings dedicated only to public testimony. So the first of these will actually be this Thursday, April 16th at 6 p.m., which will be aimed at testimony about any questions you may have regarding the FY21 budget. And then we'll be holding a hearing on May 26th at 6 p.m. for testimony about the BPS budget after all the BPS hearings have concluded, and on May 28th at 6 p.m. for testimony on any aspect of the city budget after all other hearings have concluded. Although it won't count as formal public testimony, you can also informally tweet us your questions or comments using the hashtag BOSBudget, BOSBudget. Members of my staff will be tracking that hashtag throughout this process. Again, that's BOSBudget. And for more information on the City Council budget process and how to testify, please visit the City Council's budget website at www.boston.gov/department/citycouncil/budget. Just wanted to lay all those out. We'll be repeating ways to get involved, but we definitely, as everyone is at home, want your involvement. We will need to exercise strong collective judgment over the coming months about what is the best way to budget for this pivotal year ahead. And we need your voices in that process. So thank you for getting involved. Please stay safe, stay home whenever you can, and we look forward to engaging with you virtually throughout this budget season. So now, Turning to the moment at hand, today's hearing is on dockets 0588 to 0590, orders for the FY21 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations, for the school department, and for other post-employment benefits, OPEB. Dockets 0591 to 0592, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations, and dockets 0593 to 0596, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. Our focus this morning will be a budget overview presentation from Administration and Finance, including some discussion of the impacts of COVID-19 so far. And to that end, we'll be hearing from Emma Handy, the Chief Financial Officer and Collector Treasurer for the City of Boston, and Justin Starrett, the Budget Director for the City of Boston. Before we begin, I would like to publicly thank them both for their work thus far. The budget that is now before us was substantially rewritten at great speed over the past few weeks by a budget office operating remotely in the middle of a public health emergency. The City Council will, as usual, be scrutinizing this mayoral budget and suggesting alterations. And as I said, there are many unknowable factors that will influence how it may need to change over the next 2 months. But the current situation makes it all the more important that we have a fully worked out set of budget proposals from which to begin this process. And we are grateful to them for providing the council with that material despite the present crisis. So with that, I'd like to recognize Emma Handy, the city's CFO and Collector Treasurer.
Good morning, councilors. Thank you for having us here this morning. I also would like to start with a thank you. I thank Chairwoman Bach. This is her first budget hearing as chairwoman. Not how I'm sure she envisioned it when she took on the responsibility of Ways and Means, and certainly not how we had discussed and planned for early on in this process. But I want to thank her for her thoughtfulness, both in general thinking about how the City Council will approach budgeting for FY21, but also obviously in adapting to our new reality today in terms of Zoom council hearings and all of the we will need to make and information we will process together about what the city's fiscal reality looks like in the light of coronavirus and our response to the coronavirus pandemic. I will be very brief this morning. I'm going to let Justin do a very helpful presentation that he and his team put together that will review what is in the mayor's initial FY21 budget filing. I just want to make 2 points that have really, I think, helped us guide how we thought about where we are today in terms of what we know and what we don't know about the impact of coronavirus on the FY21 budget. The first is that, obviously, as you all know, because you have been part of this, the city has a strong record of financial management. We've been recognized for 6 years in a row with the AAA bond rating. We've talked about that many times before. But I think at this point, it's really when the importance of those decisions that we've collectively made together, certainly over the past 6 years, but even I think a history much longer than that of strong financial management in the city of Boston, has positioned us to weather this, I think, on the strongest possible footing. And that is really because we have chosen some key areas to prioritize in terms of minimizing our fiscal volatility, managing our liabilities and our fixed costs, and prioritizing things like pension payments every single year throughout our budgeting process. Those decisions in the past have set us up for the strongest footing that we could have going into this today. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that and acknowledge that those were important decisions then that continue to pay dividends today in terms of how we will respond to coronavirus and how it will impact our budgeting in FY21 and beyond. The second key tenet that I think is important and stands in juxtaposition to that, though, is that obviously this is an unprecedented crisis for the city of Boston and globally. And it is really difficult for us to understand today what exactly that will mean for us. Obviously, more generally in terms of the city of Boston's response, but specifically in terms of how it will impact our finances in the medium and long term. FY21 is a somewhat clearer picture for us because most of that information is based on estimates that we are very familiar with. As the chairwoman mentioned, we, in the 11th hour of budget development, went through with a fine-tooth comb and cut tens of millions of dollars of revenue assumptions away from the budget to reflect what we thought was a more realistic reality in light of the pandemic. You can see that in the product that Justin will present to you today. And so I think that's what we do know, and we don't know what we don't know. And so we will have to continue to closely monitor new exposures on spending side, new realities in terms of revenue, and keep a watchful eye to what this will mean both in FY21, but of course in FY22 and FY23 as well. You know, the counselor mentioned that the budget process is important, and particularly in this time, and I have to agree with her. I think the reason that we chose to move forward with submitting the budget on time and sort of moving through this process, even though there is a degree of uncertainty about what FY21 will look like, is because it's important for us to set a framework for how we will respond and move forward. The city of Boston will get through this. We will come out the other side of this pandemic, and when we do, we would like to have a fiscal framework in place that protects that financial management and provides for the residents of the city of Boston. And so that is what the plan before you does. And at this point, I want to pause for just a second to thank Justin Sterrett and the budget team. The counselor mentioned that they did a lot of late in the game work. I think it's important first to thank them for the fact that they put together an entire budget that was basically done. And we were putting the final touches on it when we realized that it needed to be significantly changed in order to be responsive to the reality on the ground because of coronavirus. And so they did some amazing work in very short order to make sure that this budget reflected the best information that we had about what the impacts of coronavirus might be on FY21. And some of that work, yes, was done remotely. And so I think it's a testament to his leadership and to the brains and grit of that team that they were able to pull this together on short order. So I want to thank them. And I also want to thank my colleagues across city government who have been just incredible throughout this response, have been working tirelessly on behalf of the residents of the city of Boston. Amidst all of that, have helped us to finalize this budget and understand the plans that we've put forward in it. It's just been an amazing experience to watch the city's collective leadership come together to put this plan in place. And so I'd like to thank everybody who was involved in that, and thank you all for your time and attention as we move forward through the hearing process. I look forward to hearing what questions you have and being able to help answer them. With that, I will turn it over to Justin so that he can begin the FY21 presentation.
Thank you, Emma. I'm going to share my screen and get started, if that works, Carrie. All right. Is that coming through okay? Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Emma, for that introduction. Very kind. A big heartfelt thank you to my team, who I know is watching at home right now on YouTube. This did take a lot of work to put together at the last minute, but we feel very strongly about its recommendations, and I want to thank Councillor Bach, President Janey, and the entire council for sort of the work to date, and then the work that's going to happen over the next couple months. We really appreciate this partnership, and we really do view this as a collaborative process moving forward. So I will try to move through this as quickly as possible. There is obviously a lot of information to get to in the budget, but and we will definitely have time at the end for questions if I miss anything. So I will go through, and feel free to tag questions in the slides, and we'll come back and look at those specifics. So without further ado, as you all know, the annual operating budget and capital plan fund the essential programs and services that the City of Boston provides to all its residents. But before we dive into sort of the specifics about it, we thought it would be helpful to set a little bit of the context that Emma started to discuss about sort of what are the major emerging themes that we see in this year's budget. Obviously today and sort of for the foreseeable future, the response to the coronavirus remains our top priority. But we know that there will be considerable economic impact that will happen because of it, but sort of our focus today remains on reacting to the needs on the ground. But thankfully, as Emma mentioned, after sort of years of strong fiscal management, Boston is well positioned to do that. In addition to the sort of 6 years in a row AAA bond ratings, Moody's actually had a report come out about 3 months ago that the city was in one of the best positions in the entire country to handle the type of recession that may come out of the coronavirus. So we didn't think that would happen so soon, but we definitely feel strong about our position going into this. I think the sort of the big picture items, and we'll get into these in specific, but the budget is projected to grow next year. And I think that that's the first thing that we'll start with. The budget has grown every year since the early 1980s, and that's been through ups and downs in the economy, both things like the Great Recession and the dot-com bubble and savings and loans. All the different recessions over the year, the budget has always still gone up. So I think that that's the sort of the starting point. It is going up significantly less than what we thought it was going to just a few short months ago. And the reason, which we'll get into detail, is property tax remains our sort of stable and consistent tax revenue collection mechanism, and that's what we fund the majority of city government on. On the spending side, non-essential spending is limited, but we do fund the major commitments to education, housing, and fixed costs that are included in the plan this year. So we're excited to talk about those, but really mindful that those are really the sort of small areas that we were able to increase for next year. And that's definitely something that we wanted to prioritize. So starting with revenue, as you all know, the city collects different revenue to fund its annual operations. These include property taxes, state revenue, fees, fines, and permits, which we call departmental revenue, and excise tax revenue. Each one of these reflects a different portion of the budget. Some are much larger than others, as we'll get into. And then finally, the city is required to produce a balanced budget every year, so revenue must equal expenses. And as Emma mentioned, while we're learning more about the coronavirus every day and the effects on the local economy, we know that those are going to take shape over the next couple months, but the budget that we're submitting and submitted last week is balanced and sustainable. So starting big picture on revenue, as you can see, the overall FY21 budget is $3.647 billion. That's about $154 million, or about 4% higher than last year. This is among the smallest increases over the past 5 years. So we think it's mindful to note that. Property taxes is expected to be at $2.6 billion and will tick up to about 72% of the city's budget. State revenue is projected to go up to $474 million and represents about 13% of the city budget. Departmental revenue is expected to be flat between FY20 and 21 and represents about 10% of city revenue. But even flat revenue is actually a reduction from where we were expected to be just a few short weeks ago. That's an area we were originally projecting growth in that we've already begin to reduce for next year, pending some of the effects of COVID-19. And then finally, excise tax revenue at about $188 million, or 5% of city revenue, is projected to fall next year by $17 million due to some of the economic uncertainty on COVID-19. This 8% reduction in revenue is probably the biggest impact on the city revenue side that we'll see for next year, and something we'll dive into a little bit more later in the presentation. But starting with property taxes, obviously the biggest and most important revenue source that we collect, expected to be 72% of our budget for next year. Property taxes, as you know, is governed by Proposition 2.5, which came into existence in the early 1980s. Every year since 1981, when Prop 2.5 was introduced, the property taxes in the city of Boston have gone up on the baseline by 2.5%. That has made it a very safe and stable revenue source for the city over the past 30 years. We're projecting a total of $2.6 billion for next year, or about $161 million more than FY20. But despite representing the most important and consistent revenue source, property taxes in Boston, especially residential property taxes, remain low. This chart shows the slow growth of the actual tax levy in blue versus the maximum tax levy in red. Since Prop 2.5 was introduced, the city has increased taxes by 2.5% annually, but value has increased by 8% annually since 1986. That dynamic of slow and steady property tax growth versus large increases in value means Boston's property taxes are $1.9 billion, or 43% below our maximum tax levy ceiling of 4.4%. This and additional policies pursued by the city mean that property taxes in Boston remain low when compared to other cities. The average single-family tax bill in Boston is 38% below the FY20 statewide average. Residents will still receive the maximum exemption of 35% for next year. and the residential commercial split is fully weighted in favor of residents. The other major factor in property taxes is the new construction that has come into the city over the previous year, otherwise known as new growth. In the red box on the right, you can see we are projecting $65 million in new growth for FY21. This projection reflects a strong economy in 2019, but not at quite the unprecedented heights that we have seen over the last 4 years. When you look back at new growth patterns over the past 20 or so years, especially during economic downturns, you can see significant fluctuations. During the dot-com and Great Recession, the city saw ups and downs with new growth in the city, which is why we are expressing some caution for next year and placing that number at 65 million. We do, however, think the FY21 number of 65 million is achievable because it reflects changes during calendar year 2019 before the onset of the coronavirus. But it is definitely something we will continue to monitor and evaluate for future years. If a sustained recession affects Boston development and construction, this will likely make itself known in fiscal years 22, 23, and beyond. So moving on to our next largest revenue category, state aid. This category probably has the most uncertainty because it depends very much on how the state and federal governments address their own revenue losses and importantly, what type of stimulus packages may be made available to the city. As folks know, both the state and federal government are sort of moving at a very rapid pace when it comes to dealing with the coronavirus, and some of that is going to result in potential funding coming back to the city. So while we may have risk when it comes to state aid and federal government, there is also potential opportunity similar to in 2008 and 2009 with the American Recovery Act, the ARA funding that came to the city helped offset a lot of the cuts that we saw at the state and federal level. So while there is risk associated with it, there is also potential opportunities that we will be monitoring as they come down. We know that the House and the Senate and the governor are meeting actually tomorrow on new state revenue numbers for next year, which will certainly be lower than what they projected back in January. And we will continue to monitor those developments at the State House and make adjustments in the resubmission as needed. For now, though, the best available information is the governor's proposed budget, which was actually very positive for Boston, mostly because it included the first year of the Student Opportunity Act funding. So overall, we saw a projected increase of $9 million, including a 2% increase in unrestricted general government aid, so UGA, and $7 million increase in education aid, which includes Chapter 70 and charter school reimbursements. Despite the uncertainty with state aid and it representing 13% of our revenue, it's actually a much smaller percent of the city budget than it was 20 years ago. In 2002, state aid was 30% of the city budget, so changes at the state level affect us much more then than they do now. The other major categories, which we'll get into detail in a moment, include department revenue and excise revenue, have been relatively consistent as a portion of the overall budget, growing over the last 20 years. This does, however, make us very reliant on stable property taxes and will help us weather any changes in the broader economy better than other cities, but makes the implementation of them very important. Moving on to the third largest category of departmental revenue. This category covers fees, fines, licenses, and permits issued by the city. While these somewhat follow the economy, they have been very stable over both down and up economies over the last 20 years. The blue and red line bars below show department revenue like fines and fees over the past 20 years. As you can see, we are collecting roughly the same amount as we did in FY10 and only slightly more overall than FY2002, which shows that there's not a lot of fluctuation on a year-to-year basis, whether it's a good economy or a bad economy. So that's one of those things where we were probably projecting more revenue for next year in these two categories. But because of some of the uncertainty, we've level funded those between FY20 and 21. While we were projecting this category to be flat overall, this is actually a reduction from where we were a few weeks ago. So we've already started to account for some of those effects. One of the major components of departmental revenue are pilot payments and 121 A, B, and C tax agreements. As you can see, pilot payments have more than doubled since 2002 and are up to nearly 50 million in 2021. At the same time, 121 A, B, and C tax agreements have dropped considerably, down to about 31 million for next year from a high of 67 million in 2000. The last revenue category we'll go over is excise tax revenue at 5% of the city budget, or about $187 million for next year. This is where we are projecting a $17 million or 8% decrease in revenue from FY20 to FY21. The biggest component of excise taxes at nearly 50% is room occupancy taxes, which is a 6.5% add-on to the nightly rate for both hotels and short-term rentals. The second biggest category at 27% is motor vehicle excise. This is an annual payment to have a car registered in Boston of $25 per $1,000 of vehicle value. The third biggest is the 0.75% meals tax at 14%, and the fourth largest is jet fuel tax at 5% of the average fuel sales price for flights out of Logan Airport at 11% of excise taxes. So as you all know, excise taxes are traditionally very elastic to the local economy. The more money people have, the more they go out to eat, the more they stay in hotels. What makes this potential downturn different is the current public health measures have put some of those normal activities completely on hold. In the Great Recession in 08 through 12 and the dot-com bubble, restaurants were still open, hotels were still open, and there still was travel. That makes projecting this change very difficult, but we've tried to address the economic uncertainty by making the adjustments that we're proposing today. For each of these projections for next year, we reviewed the current data we have. So basically we're 3 or 4 weeks into sort of what a shutdown economy looks like. And we're trying to predict when the economy reopens, how quickly things will get back to normal and what does that new normal look like. And that's how we came up with these assumptions for next year. Room occupancy is obviously the biggest category because it's the biggest risk category because it's the largest source. And for FY21, we're projecting 87 million, or about a 10 million or 10% cut from FY20. Motor vehicles are somewhat less elastic because while people may forego buying a new car if the economy is contracting, they still will register their existing cars. So we're projecting a relatively modest 4% reduction, or about $2 million less. Meals tax are another high risk category, so we're projecting a 15% reduction, or about 5%, or 5 million, I should say. And finally, for aircraft fuel, we're projecting a $3 million reduction, or about 13%, because even as effects in Boston may lift in FY21, this is obviously an international crisis, and Boston relies on both international travel for our tourism, but also our schools and all the other institutions that come to Boston. While an 8%, $17 million reduction is overall pretty severe already, we're actually projecting this category to grow between 4 and 6% for next year. So when taken in tandem with that, this is actually a 12 to 15% reduction from where we were projecting just a few short years ago, and is well over $20 million in lost revenue. So moving on to spending, as you all know, the city's operating budget covers the services and programs that residents rely on, including education, public safety, transportation, and much more. The FY21 budget is a responsible and balanced budget that invests in our core needs and funds several investments in targeted areas like housing, public education. This level of spending will allow us to begin to account for the effects of the coronavirus pandemic, but also ensure a well-resourced city government for next year. So getting into the specifics, overall spending for FY21 is slated to rise by that same 154 million to about 3.65 billion total. The 4 major categories of spending are city departments, the Boston Public Health Commission, public education, and fixed costs. Starting with city departments, while some individual city departments will see increased budgets for FY21, overall, the total of city departments are approximately level funded between FY20 and FY21. On the public health side, to ensure a robust continued response to COVID-19, BPHC is slated to receive a $9 million or nearly 10% increase to about $103 million for next year. Public education will see the single largest increase of about $98 million or 7% of an increase to nearly $1.5 billion total. And finally, fixed costs like pensions and debt service will see an increase of about $45 million or about 10%. This chart looks at the overall city spending and how much each category makes up of the total budget. The largest single slice continues to be public education at nearly 1.5 billion or 41%. City departments reflect the next biggest grouping, including 690 million or 19% on public safety, 100 million or 11% on public education, and 100 million or 12% on fixed costs. Finally, fixed costs like pensions and debt service will see an increase of about $45 million or 7%. $335 million or 9% on city departments, $264 million or 7% on transportation, including the T, and 7% or $260 million on city employee health care, which all departments access. Finally, the city is slated to spend about $507 million or 14% on fixed costs like pensions and debt service, consistent with our funding schedules. So as I mentioned, the city is projecting $154 million in new revenue for next year. Again, that is one of the smallest amounts over the last 5 years. But this is how, in a limited funding situation, we are determining to split up that new funding. It obviously leaves very little room for discretionary funding on a year-to-year basis. So the first $98 million of our new funding, or about 63%, goes towards increases in public education, both for BPS and charter schools. Fixed costs like pension and debt service are up about $27 million and $19 million respectively, for about $46 million total. And finally, that last increase is about $9 million more for the Boston Public Health Commission. So starting with a little bit more detail on fixed costs, pensions are up $27 million to $292 million. This keeps us on pace with our current schedule. And I think the big note on that is that while the broader equities market are obviously in flux right now, and the city is going to continue to monitor the economic climate for effects on our pensions, we're seeing really wild swings in both the stock market and the broader equities market. We saw a pretty bad month of March, followed by one of the best weeks ever last week. So I think it's something that we're continuing to track, and we're going to make adjustments going forward, but it's not going to affect this year's pension schedule. Debt service is projected to go up by about $19 million next year to about $206 million total. Debt service is crucial to maintain our $3 billion capital plan, which funds all of the roads, bridges, parks, and schools in all of our neighborhoods. And all of the really important projects that we have throughout the city are funded because of this debt service. So maintaining that into next year is a really important factor. The next biggest category was, or the biggest category was city departments, which when you group them together represents about $1.5 billion. Salary, personnel, and health benefits reflect about 75% of all costs incurred by departments. Contracts and special appropriation, like aid to veterans, represent about 20% of the city department budgets. And finally, supplies and expenses make up the remaining 5%. Obviously, the city is always identifying ways to save funding in order to reinvest in new and better programs and services. But this year, we had to take an especially fine-tooth comb to that because we had such limited new resources that we were projecting for next year. For FY21, the city identified about $14 million in savings to implement in order to make targeted investments in other areas that we'll get to in a moment. These savings include the $8.6 million through the recently negotiated Public Employees Commission insurance agreement for FY21 through 25. We want to thank our unions and public unions for their work over the last couple months, and I know the council was very helpful in passing that a couple months ago. So we really appreciate everyone's work on that. That really is coming in really important right now as we look for savings. We have about $3 million in savings through a mandatory 1% cut to all departments from their non-personnel budgets. And finally, we have a few other savings, like $750,000 through eliminating some long-term vacant positions, $625,000 from savings from the first year of the Renew Boston Trust, and about $550,000 in savings from recent debt service refinancing that we did. The Public Health Commission is one of the few areas that's going to see an increase for next year, and it's vital that we do that to maintain a sort of fully funded BPHC. The FY21 budget proposes a $9 million or 9.7% increase to about $103 million total for next year. This investment builds on years of investment at BPHC, up over 50% since FY 2014. This level of investment will ensure a well-resourced BPHC, emergency medical service, and Office of Recovery Services for next year as we continue to fight the effects of the coronavirus and then address the obvious needs on the public health side that will come after that. This level of investment will also include new funding to address violence prevention, improving health data, purchase essential EMS equipment, and pursue a low-threshold housing respite program. In good times and in times of economic uncertainty, public education continues to be the top priority for the city budget. The FY21 investment of $1.5 billion for the Boston Public Schools and charter schools reflects a long and continued commitment to investing in students. BPS for next year will see an $80 million increase, and charter schools will see a $17 million increase. Since FY14, on an annual basis, BPS is up about $320 million, and charter schools are up about $120 million, or about $440 million since FY14. And then finally, per pupil spending is up over $22,000 at BPS, up from $16,000 in FY14. As many of you know, at the Mayor's State of the City address this year, he announced a $100 million investment in new additive funding over the next 3 years, above and beyond standard cost increases. This 3-year commitment to BPS to provide new resources above and beyond standard costs allows for significant new resources today, long-range planning, and execution of the new strategic plan. FY21 is the first year of that investment, and despite the great economic uncertainty, this budget keeps that promise. So just to dive in a little bit more specific on the FY21 BPS budget, the FY21 city investment of $1.26 billion in BPS, of the $80 million increase, about $44 million covers the baseline cost increases for BPS, including student services, the cost of the collective bargaining contracts, transportation, and other operations. The remaining $36 million is dedicated towards new investments directly in classrooms, especially targeting the 33 transformation schools identified by the district. Some details on those investments include $9 million more so students can have a strong foundation for success, and more support to connect families to resources and information. $12 million to increase teacher skill through coaching and constant feedback and developing a high quality curriculum. And $15 million to raise the bar on student learning with high quality learning materials, resources, and improved learning environments. And there will be a lot more discussion in detail of the BPS budget at the hearings over the next couple weeks. The other major announcement and the other major funding commitment in this year's budget is falling in line with the Mayor's $500 million transformational investment in housing announced at the State of the City. This investment starts with a $100 million investment in city funding and would be supplemented with new dedicated funding from the sale of a Lafayette garage in downtown Boston and the state passing the real estate transfer tax. This budget in FY21 makes a $16 million investment in new city operating and capital resources for housing, consistent with the Mayor's commitment of city resources over the next 5 years. This investment will create and preserve hundreds of new units next year, including new affordable home ownership opportunities, preserving rental opportunities, including the first city-funded voucher program, redoing BHA senior and disabled housing units, and finally an infrastructure fund to help support large-scale housing developments, increase their affordability. So the last part on the operating budget is, in addition to the housing and education investments, the city identified over $14 million worth of savings that could be redirected towards some small targeted investments, but impactful in certain other areas of the budget. They include about $1.9 million to provide rapid rehousing for youth and young adults, and expanding efforts to end chronic and family homelessness. That is going to be especially important coming out of coronavirus. $1 million for a targeted citywide campaign around youth violence, $630,000 to expand zero waste initiatives, including a meaningful composting pilot, education, and more support for the zero waste initiative. $1.3 million for new staff, maintenance, and nearly doubling the annual street tree plantings through the capital plan. And $900,000 in new funding for some of our most vulnerable residents, including the Human Rights Commission, Boston Saves, the Immigrant Defense Fund, language and food access, childcare entrepreneurs, and financial security for seniors, all of which will be more important in the coming weeks and months ahead. So I know that was a lot on the operating budget. I just want to quickly touch on the capital plan. This plan, as you all know, covers the major construction projects that the city is undertaking and stretches over a 5-year period to allow for the city to plan, design, and build complex projects across every neighborhood. This is just going to focus on the high-level details of the capital plan, and we will be back in a week or so to get into some of the more nitty-gritty detail on specific projects with our colleagues over in the Public Facilities Department. But as a sort of broad strokes, the capital plan is the city's plan to maintain our inventory of assets like roads, bridges, schools, and parks. The city uses a combination of general obligation bonds, which are funded through debt service, and federal and state grants to fund the plan. The capital plan invests consistent with the Imagine Boston 2030 plan and all of the umbrella plans that fall underneath it, like Build BPS, Go Boston 2030, and many more. For this year, 90% of the capital plan is invested consistent with IB20 priorities. So that's something that we're excited about. Since FY14, we thought it'd be helpful to give a little bit of a history of the capital plan and sort of the relative funding levels. Since FY14, the city has grown the size of the capital plan by over $1 billion, or about 70%. You have seen this through new investments in schools, new neighborhood libraries, new parks, new transportation infrastructure throughout the city. The city has also increased the number and amount of grants we are receiving through more access to funding from the State School Building Authority, which is something we're excited about. The city is also starting to see the impact of planning efforts through a considerable amount of new projects moving into design and construction phases in this year's capital plan. For FY21 through 25, the city is growing the capital plan to reflect these projects and will reach the $3 billion threshold for the first time. On this chart, you will see the breakdown of the entire plan by Imagine Boston 2030 category. So you can see the city spends about 30% on roads, bridges, and transportation, about 24% on schools, about 10% on public safety, about 12% on parks and open space projects, and then the rest is spread out on various different departments. So moving on to the new funding for FY21 through 25, the plan proposes to add about $538 million in general obligation funding over the next 5 years. Of that new funding, about $140 million is for schools, about $144 million goes towards streets, about $79 million goes towards public safety, $55 million towards health and human services, $57 million towards parks, environment, and open space, and about $48 million goes towards civic spaces. As I mentioned before, when we build the capital plan, the city has a 7% cap on debt service as a percent of the city's operating budget. As you can see here, this plan assumes we increase our borrowing over the next 5 years to get closer to that 7% cap. We think that's important for two reasons. One, investing in a potentially down economy will not only create an economic stimulus in the local economy, it'll also result in better prices for the city. So if overall construction prices come down, we'll be able to get more projects for our funding levels that we have. And the city has been fortunate to benefit from a AAA bond rating, where we were able to add a significant amount of new funding into the plan and still live within this 7% debt limit. So with that, I will be going over some specific cabinet projects in 2 weeks at the next hearing. But I would encourage everyone to visit budget.boston.gov and access our capital map, where you can search for any address in the city and find all the different capital projects going on in your neighborhood. And then I will give a final plug for the overall budget website, where I would encourage everyone to visit, again, budget.boston.gov, where you can learn more about the budget, including videos, featured analysis, and our open data portal, where you can download and manipulate both the operating budget and capital plan. And with that, I will thank you, counselors, again. We look forward to working with you, and I believe Emma and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Justin. I'd like to also recognize Councillor Wu and Councillor Campbell, who I think I neglected to mention at the beginning. So thank you to the whole council for being present today. So we're going to move into questions now. We'll be doing, I'll be recognizing colleagues in the order of arrival. We'll be doing questions for 5 minutes each. I will tap my makeshift gavel. You'll hear the sound if we get to the 5-minute mark, since I can't give anybody a glare in this situation. And I would just encourage everyone to focus on kind of the overarching questions for Justin and Emma. As Justin mentioned, he'll be back next week to talk specifically about the capital budget and capital projects. We'll be having the superintendent with us, along with some of her staff, for 2 hearings tomorrow on specific BPS level stuff. So I would just say, if we can focus on the big picture aspects of this budget today, that would be great. So with that, I'll start, and I promise to keep myself to 5 minutes. So let me set a timer. So I just wanted to thank you again, Justin and Emma, for the presentation, and say, I think from my perspective, I'm glad that we're keeping the commitments to housing, albeit maybe a little scaled back from where we might have wanted to be, but there's a lot of major new commitments in this budget, and also the commitments to public education, because as I think about where we're going to be going in the year ahead, the supports for housing and supports for education, given the learning loss that our students are inevitably going to experience over these few months, I think are going to be really important. And the same with the youth violence prevention work. We're going to need it more than ever. I'm glad to see commitments here to climate change related measures, from street tree planting to zero waste, to staff for the Conservation Commission, to the projects on the capital side, because I think we all know that even if we're in an economic recession, there's a ticking clock on the climate change front, and we can't afford to wait that out, regardless of the economic situation. I also agree that capital projects right now are a very good form of counter-cyclical spending for the city to be engaging in. I think, the biggest questions that I want to ask you are really around COVID-19 related adjustments. I think we've all already seen that in FY20, we've been directing funds on the city side towards food access, towards housing supports, towards small business assistance. And some of that has come in through external grants. Some of that, is money from in FY20 that we can repurpose. But I only imagine that those kinds of needs are going to grow in FY21. And besides the position in the Office of Emergency Management to coordinate volunteers, I don't see a lot of that baked into the budget yet. So I'm just curious how you all are thinking about moving money to address those issues in advance of the resubmission that we'll all be talking about in 2 months, and kind of how the council should proceed in thinking about those things as well.
Sure, I'll start, and Emma, feel free to jump in. So I would say we spent a lot of time thinking about this. COVID-19 and response has been such an all-encompassing effort by every city department that there is no sort of COVID-19 budget that we identify, because everyone's working on COVID-19, whether it's from our economic development departments to our housing departments to our frontline public safety, everything is just currently geared towards that. So I think there is certainly, as needs emerge over the next couple of months, especially needs that we know are going to persist into FY21, I could definitely see that would be an area we might need to come back in the resubmission and shift some funding, especially around restarting the economy, and definitely about how we deal with getting businesses back up and running. That's certainly an area that is going to continue to evolve and continue to persist. But I would say in FY20, we're working on landing the plane, so to speak, in terms of identifying areas that we need to spend money on immediately. You mentioned it, some of the food access stuff. Certainly BPS is working to identify all their internal resources to redirect towards buying Chromebooks, and working with outside partners on implementing distance learning. Those are definitely areas that are sort of high priority and right now. In FY21, as needs emerge, I think that certainly could be something that we come back if we find that there's a specific area that needs adjustment or supplements, and we can certainly we'll be reviewing that over the next couple months.
Okay, and can you speak quickly to the youth-related adjustments? Because I think if one is reading the council, they're across several different bins. There's money in the mayor's office, there's money in youth engagement and employment, there's a move of some of that out of BCYF and into this new Office of Health and Human Services. So I think given it's so cross-departmental, it would be helpful for you to walk through that a little. Yeah, definitely. So I'll start with I'll take through those each individually. So YE, they're seeing, I think, about an $827,000 increase, or about 12%. That is to both maintain we actually increased the number of school year students that we had in this current year. That's both to maintain that increase for next year and then account for the minimum wage increase that's going up next year. So to make sure that we still have the same number of students for summer and school year for next year, that's why that increase was in there. There is basically a lifting up and a sort of a separation of the HHS cabinet. So Chief Marty Martinez he and his staff had been funded out of the BCYF budget over the last 4 or 5 years. This was because they've sort of taken on a lot more work and they've taken on a lot more policy priority areas.
we felt it was time to sort of elevate them to their own standalone department. So it's really just a swap in funding of about $1 million between BCYF and HHS. And those are, that's kind of what that sort of decrease in BCYF is and the increase in the other one. I would say that in addition to that, there's about $1 million investment in a citywide youth violence strategy that really hits a lot of different departments, whether it's the mayor's office or YEE or HHS. There are different programs within each of those around investments in the SOAR program and career pathways, investments in the police department around the Community Engagement Bureau and expanding their summer programming. I would say a lot of it is certainly stuff we'll be able to get into, I think, at the hearings, but I think definitely coming out of COVID-19 where we know that there's a need for more investment in our youth, and I think this budget tries to do that as effectively as possible.
Great, thank you. That's all my time for now. I'll just thank you for addressing, I had sent a lot of revenue questions your way, and thank you for addressing many of them in your presentation. I'd like to recognize Councillor Flynn from District 2 with Councillor Edwards on deck. Councillor Flynn. Where? Councillor Flynn, you're unmuted.
Thank you, Council Block. And thank you to the panelists for Emma and Justin for your leadership on this budget and your leadership in the city for many years. Could either of you talk about the city's rainy day fund and what impact that would have on cuts to city programs? And are we allowed to use the city's rainy day fund to include some of that money into the city budget that may have been taken out?
So, Councillor, this is Emma Handy. I would just say the city does not have a formal rainy day fund, but we sort of count two related sources of essentially cash as our reserves for a rainy day. We both have free cash as well as additional unrestricted reserves that we track and manage, and that's part of our strong record of fiscal management, that we've been able to accumulate those reserves and ensure that they are there for indeed that rainy day that you mentioned. The usage of those funds is something that I think requires a lot of consideration and careful thought before we tap into that source. Typically, and sort of best practice on using those funds is as you withstand a multi-year recession, being able to use those at some point in the later part of a recession to help offset really catastrophic cuts, layoffs, things like that would be very problematic and impact our ability to perform our core service delivery. At this point for FY21, the things that we pared back in our budget to be responsive to coronavirus were really new investments that we had planned. There are no service reductions because of coronavirus. There are some things, some savings, as Justin mentioned, that were already pre-planned or that had come about because of other initiatives that we had planned, like the Renew Boston Trust sort of taking off this year and gleaning our first energy savings. But there are no layoffs, there are no service reductions. And so in general, I think best practice is that reserves are saved to mitigate catastrophic cuts rather than to replace funding for investments. Justin, anything you would add?
The only thing I would add is I think that's exactly right. The funding of new programs with reserves is a dangerous game because those reserves are sort of constantly dwindling. So we would be sort of, I think, reticent to want to expand a lot of programs using reserves because next year they won't be there. So I think that's kind of our approach right now. This budget does not propose any new rainy day fund withdrawals. We do always plan to use about $40 million worth of free cash to fund our OPEB liability, and that's been consistent for the last about 10 years. We have no other proposed changes in this budget as of right now.
That's a good point. I'll just linger on for 1 second, if you'll bear with me. But Justin raised a good point that is an important, I think, principle of strong fiscal management, which is that reserves by their nature are one time. You accumulate them over a course of many years, and there's only that limited amount of reserves available to you. And so it's really important that you minimize the amount of reserves that you use for ongoing programming or staffing or things like that. And again, you can do that in a time where the economic realities really demand that you do in order to maintain continuity of service. But using a one-time resource for an ongoing new cost, particularly a new ongoing new cost, is generally frowned upon in terms of fiscal management, and is something that would give rating agencies and other fiscal watchdogs a reason to just ask questions about sort of how we're planning and appropriately managing our spending.
Thank you. Was there programs or services in the budget prior to this epidemic that would normally be in here but now are being cut out of the budget? And if so, could you give us a little bit of background on what type of city programs are being cut because of this epidemic?
So I would say that to echo Emma's point, there's no baseline city services or change of delivery that we're projecting in next year's budget. I think the areas that we had to scale back on some of our ambition were, I think, Councilor Bach mentioned the environment. So I think we would have loved to triple the sort of investment in street trees every year, but we were only able to double it. I think we would have loved to add some additional public safety officers across the board. But I think that, given Emma's point, those are sort of fixed costs that'll be with us forever moving forward. We were able to make some small targeted increases for those departments, but I think we were forced to scale back on some of our ambition. I think the clearest way to say is basically we probably had a budget that was closer to about $187 million, as of 3 weeks ago, but we've sort of had to take about $30 million or so of revenue adjustments down, and those were really going to be focused on some new programming. And I think that we really tried to focus on maintaining the sort of the commitments we've already made. Obviously, the school department had already gone through their budget process over the past 2.5 months, so sort of any changes to that would have been sort of meant reductions for them in their schools for next year. And then investments around housing, public health, and fixed costs are areas that we had to maintain because those are sort of the highest priority areas, and certainly areas that I think, as I mentioned, changes to our pension assumptions or our debt service presumptions would sort of affect our overall market viability and sort of how rating agencies look at us.
And my final question is relating to the language access program. I know during this pandemic, language access has been a critical part of the outreach to our residents, especially our immigrant neighbors. Can you talk a little about the increase you're looking at, and does that mean you're bringing on more staff? Are you bringing more staff on that speak various languages? How are you going to do that? What languages are you looking for? And how will this benefit the department?
Sure. So we are proposing to increase the language access budget by $50,000 for next year, up to a total of about $520,000. Now that $520,000 budget is centered in the Office of Neighborhood Services, which includes both staffers. So Pinar, who's the director over there, does a fantastic job of running that program. The majority of the funding, however, ends up getting used by individual departments to either access translation materials or language access or folks who speak different languages to come on for a specific event or a contractor. So this investment is an increase, but it certainly helps to support an already pretty robust language access program. I think the departments have found that sort of standalone translators are better used on a one-off basis through contractors. So I think that that's the approach that we're taking. I think we're always trying to expand how we can get the word out in multiple different languages, and this budget will help support that. But as far as the overall scope, we weren't able to, a 10% increase in 1 year for that program is pretty significant, but we weren't able to do much more than that given the kind of fiscal realities.
Thank you. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Edwards.
Chairwoman Bach, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So thank you so much to Justin and Chief Handy for your steadfast commitment to making sure that we get all the information as soon as possible. I just wanted to follow up on as I understand it, you do not anticipate any particular cuts so much as the additional investments that we had hoped for may have to be tampered down, so that all the city services and all the city programs will likely continue into this budget, but that we don't anticipate that there will be a lot of additional stuff in the environment, what you had wanted to do in addition to what we had hoped for. And I bring that up as a question to then so many of the things that we fought for last year, such as ZBA reform and the massive amount of technological increases that we're going to need from DoIT to do the ZBA, to even to continue to monitor the, short-term rentals, to also look at the housing voucher program, to also do and increase the efficacy, of the Human Rights Commission. All of those things were also extra. So I'm wondering if what of those things you're going to be tampering down or unable to fulfill the commitments to actually bring them about, because we're having to tamp down some of those budget reforms. That's one question, and then I'll just move on to the next one so you can just do it all in one response. If you could go through the housing numbers again, specifically, as I understood it, much of that budget is dependent on the State House passing the transfer fee. So let's assume it doesn't pass. Now we have COVID, and you're tampering down. So how much of that budget is going to be tampered down really in terms of our commitment to the housing, to the new voucher program? I'm really concerned about that. And then the third major bucket, which you will not have an answer for right now, so I'm just saying that, but I would love to see it. This is a matter of my education, honestly. This is, my colleagues who have been here longer than me, I think that's Councilor O'Malley, Councilor Baker, and Councilor Flaherty, especially talk about the leanest times in the city and what happened in those times. And I am curious, honestly, in the leanest times of the city, what's the budget? What's the minimum budget we can have as a city to function? I don't know what that number is. I think Councilor Flynn was kind of hinting at looking at the reserves and so on and so forth. So thank you, Councilor Flynn, for that line of questioning. I'm curious, what's the skeletal city budget look like to function? So those are the three major buckets of my questions, and I think that that's it. So I'll wait for your answer. Thank you, Councilor Bach.
So we'll start at the first two, and then I'm sure Emma will have thoughts on the third one. So the investments around the Human Rights Commission, the ZBA, and I'm blanking on the third one. So we do have an investment.
Short-term rental? Short-term rental? Short-term rental. Yep.
So around the Human Rights Commission, we do have an investment of about $250,000. That's for 4 staffers for the HRC. So while we certainly, in a perfect world, that could have been 8 or 10 or more, that's sort of what we can do to get them started for next year to start taking cases. Around the ZBA, we do have an investment of 3 staffers, so about $120,000 in the ZBA, and some accompanying technology investments, which are just through the DoIT, Department of Information Technology. So part of it is going to show up in the ISD budget, and part of it will show up in the DoIT budget. And then finally on short-term rentals, I think the overall ISD approach to managing short-term rentals is one through more technology. So they are working through right now with their they've actually reprioritized some of their sort of housing inspectors to be more data analysts, and that's something that we supported in this budget by transferring basically 2 positions to better support them to understand the data, because it's a much more effective tool for them to manage short-term rentals through the information we're getting from online, as opposed to sort of random checks. And then on housing, so the housing investment is kind of twofold. There was a $500 million commitment to housing over the next 5 years based on 3 sources of revenue. $1 million coming from city resources, and then a combination of the real estate transfer tax and the sale of the Lafayette Garage in downtown Boston would make up the remaining $400 million. So the city's intent was always to put $100 million of city money over the next 5 years, and this budget proposes to do $16 million of that $100 million. And that's pretty consistent with what we were planning already. And the reason why it's not exactly 20 million is because these programs ramp up over time. You mentioned the housing voucher program. So we do have, and we did maintain the $2.5 million investment in rental vouchers. But the idea is that that program starts on January 1st and would become a full $5 million program for FY22. Now, obviously, we don't have a crystal ball, but that's the intent sort of moving forward over the next 6 months. So we do feel like that's a program that'll ramp up over time. and get us closer to that $20 million number that we're trying to get to every year. The challenge with the real estate transfer tax and the Lafayette Square Garage is Beacon Hill has functionally come to a stop on anything that's non-COVID related. And, we are still pursuing the sale of the Lafayette Garage. We think we need to time it correctly because we need to make sure that we're getting the best price for that asset. So we are evaluating our options before we sort of formally release it. But we think that those two are areas we're still pursuing, but they were never going to really be reflected in this year's budget unless the state had already acted on the transfer tax for next year, which as of now they haven't. And then for the sort of the skeleton budget, I think that we're probably a little bit away from understanding what that looks like completely, but it's definitely something that, we're always doing contingency planning. I think the rainy day fund, other resources, other things that we have. I think the big unknown factor here, which is really going to, it's going to make or break a lot of other cities a lot worse than Boston, is federal funding. So in 2008, 2009, 2010, when there was a Great Recession, the worst recession since the 1920s, federal government came in with hundreds of millions of dollars for Massachusetts and tens of millions for the city of Boston. This is something that, at least in initial size and scale, is going to require some sort of federal investment to that level. But we haven't seen it come through either of the 3 or 3.5 stimulus packages that have come through so far. We're hopeful to get, we're hopeful to advocate with our state and federal delegation to make sure that that gets back to us. But until we know that, it'll be hard to figure out sort of where the areas that we need to cut.
I would just add, sorry, go ahead. I was just going to add, sort of tying your first question and your third question together, that I think, one of the things that we've said and that you all correctly pointed out is that we have a plan right now for FY21, and that we expect that throughout the council's budget process and through the mayor's recent, that we will know more about what that looks like. And so it was very important to us in the FY21 plan to prioritize the things that we had committed to do, whether that was schools or the ZBA work, or whatever it may be. And so those are the investments that you'll see, in sort of making the numbers work with the revenue reductions that we need to absorb, or prioritize for inclusion in FY21, probably to the expense of other new investments that were also exciting and that we wanted to pursue. That's our reality right now, and we will continue to monitor that and track it. And the hope is that that can be the reality when it comes time to enact a FY21 budget. But certainly, we'll have to look at those revenue numbers and keep adjusting as we learn more about what the impact is for the city of Boston. And that process is that very process that you talked about in terms of sort of understanding what are the contingencies, as Justin said. What do we need to be worried about moving into the future, both for the coming fiscal year and fiscal years beyond? What can we control and what do we not have control over, but we're going to adapt and reflect?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor. Councillor Flaherty, you're up next, and Councillor Mejia is on deck.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you for your efforts on behalf of the council, sort of streamlining the budget and the process, and look forward to working with Emma and Justin in the weeks ahead. I just want to sort of pick up where my colleague, the previous speaker, spoke about the housing piece and the tax transfer. Obviously, this is an important time for all of us, and the focus on housing will be of paramount importance. Just want to put on the radar a line item for affordable housing and have it ready to go in the event that things move up at Beacon Hill for the tax transfer. I would hate to have a situation where they move on the tax transfer and we're sitting still, not knowing how to implement those funds. So if we could at the very least have a line item ready to go in this budget, even if the number is 0, but at least have a mechanism where we can deploy those resources immediately. And want to shift obviously on public health. I'm really worried about our community health centers. I think that we really need to go back to the table here and rework the numbers and make sure that we have more resources for our health centers. They are in our neighborhoods on the front lines. And I know because I've spoken to a lot of the executive directors, given the COVID-19 response, they are absolutely strapped. And I know the focus is sort of on the bigger play here, which is obviously our hospitals, but our community health centers, arguably some of the best in the nation, are struggling right now. And I think we need to address some of those issues through this budget. And again, the conversation is different today than it was several weeks ago. Shifting gears maybe to some degree on public safety. I've raised these issues about the two chief positions that were eliminated. One where we have an existing pipeline, and we don't need to revisit what happened up at Merrimack Valley to envision a potential scenario in our own city. And also because of the Longwood medical area, they also don't have a district chief at a time when we're in a pandemic. Our hospitals are busting at the seams over there. And so I didn't see either of those in the budget, and I have some concerns about it. And again, I guess that, there's going to be, there were things that were discussed that I guess the wish list in this budget, those are off the table clearly in light of the COVID-19, but these are public health, public safety, and housing issues that I think need to be addressed in this. And finally, I also don't see chiropractic services on our healthcare formulary, something that would save us a lot of money and also get our city employees back to work quicker in the long run, which would again help save us money. So that's more. Those are the areas I'd like to be addressed: housing, public health, public safety, and look forward to working with everyone moving forward.
I can start maybe and just do two. Maybe start with housing first, and then we'll jump into the other stuff. So I think for the transfer tax, we're definitely going to have to come back to the council and file an order to sort of implement what the new number would be, and sort of I think that would be definitely the opportunity to talk about some of the specific programs. I think but in terms of getting up to speed, I think so that we're ready to go. I think we completely agree, which is why some of the programs that we have in here right now, like increasing down payment assistance or 1+ mortgage program or vouchers or BHA units, those are all things that we can ramp up very quickly if new resources are made available. So I think there are some underlying areas that would be ripe for increases if and when the transfer tax does come. But I think we would definitely need to have that conversation with the council about coming back to submit the formal order.
Very good. And on the our community health centers, as well as the fire department issues, as well as the chiropractic services.
Yep. So on the community health centers, it's definitely something I would need to look into a little bit more. To my knowledge, our only formal relationship with some of our community health centers is really currently through the BPHC and some of the youth violence and sort of baseline health data testing work that goes on between them. So I think we'd have to explore it. Now, to my knowledge, and certainly not expert, actually Emma's probably the expert on it, the majority of health center funding probably comes from the state through programs like Mass Health and Medicare. But definitely, I think we would need to dig in a little bit deeper to see where a city investment might make sense. And then not to, I think to your point, Councilor, we'd have to see what other area of the city we'd have to reduce in order to fund something like that. Because I think to everyone's point, I do not think we're in an additive place, at least right now in the city budget. So we'd have to kind of go in and check the boxes on what might need to be reduced for a very worthwhile cause in community health centers. And then I know.
Yeah, so I would just add, I think Chief Martinez and the team at BPHC, I think every day is staying in very close coordination with community health centers in terms of how the city can support them through a variety of ways, including access to personal protective equipment, that supports sort of clearing hurdles to make sure that they're able to stand up the programs that they need throughout coronavirus. And so I think the focus of our efforts has really been around that. Justin's correct. We don't really have much of a funding relationship with the CHCs. That is heavily from the state. And obviously they are clearly looking at what they can do for healthcare providers as they move through this crisis. And I think that will be an important source of funding. I think in general, the city is going to identify a great number of needs as we move through this response. And in every case, we have to really look hard at whether that's something that we are currently in the business of funding and supporting as a municipal government, or whether that is sort of outside of the lane that we are able to function in because we have a much more limited budget than either federal or state. And so much of the need of what we are being asked to respond to are really places where typically have been supported through federal stimulus or state funding. And so when we do make those decisions that we need to step in, we have to do it very carefully and make sure we understand the impacts on the city budget, as Justin said. And so much of our work moving forward, I think, is going to be advocating at both the federal and the state level to ensure that our partners in the communities, whether they're CHCs or the work that we're doing with rental assistance or small businesses, a lot of that work is really, in order to be impactful on the scale that we need it, is going to have to come from federal or state partners. And so we will be looking for those opportunities and trying to identify what that need is there and figure out what we can do on the city side to help further support that work. I'll just add briefly to make sure that we address all your questions. Oh, sorry, Chairwoman.
No, it's fine. Just wrapping up.
Sorry, just on the chiefs, I think obviously the fire department has a new interim commissioner. I think the chiefs are not something that appeared in the fire department's request for FY21 funds, but certainly something we are happy to follow up with the commissioner on to see where he is at. And I would just obviously our public safety in terms of the staffing needs that they have right now during this pandemic. And we are ensuring every day that those public safety divisions have what they need to get through the pandemic, and we will continue to make sure that they have that support. Chiropractors, we talked a little bit about during PEC, and so happy to follow up with that, but we had identified that as a priority moving into those negotiations. We were not able to obtain the savings level necessary to support an expansion of a new program through the PEC negotiations, and so the agreement that was voted on in January did not ultimately include services through chiropractic. It is something that, you mentioned before, Councillor, is a service that we are interested in. Obviously, it comes with a cost, and we hope a savings as well, but ultimately, we just need to make it fit within the parameters of the negotiation this round.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mejia, you have the floor. 1 second.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Councillor Bach, for hosting this. I just have a few questions in regards to the process. I'm curious, and right now, I'm just wondering, I have several questions. Most of my questions pertain to more the process in terms of how we got about coming to these numbers. And then I have some very specific questions about some of the budget items. One is I'm wondering what role and how did you all engage stakeholders in deciding what line items you were going to be focusing on? Did you consult with nonprofit organizations? Did you consult the general public? Just curious about your process. Oh, hi. So wondering what your process was in terms of getting to this place, Justin.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that public engagement has actually been a really big focus of our office over the last 2 or 3 years. The concrete ways we did them over the last year or so was at the mayor's coffee hours and at all sort of citywide public events. We started sending a budget roadshow basically to engage with constituents, answer questions. A lot of what we heard from folks was just a kind of understanding the process and really teaching them about when was the time to advocate. The vast majority of the sort of stakeholder interaction actually happens between frontline city departments and those organizations that they work with every day. So for instance, if there's a Friends group or a Parks group that is interested in a certain program, they usually work through that specific department, and then that department will then submit requests to us. So a lot of that initial community engagement happens at that level. And then I would certainly say that the council process is the main avenue for public engagement, where folks certainly testify at every hearing based on each of the different subjects.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just curious whether or not the budget was translated in different languages.
So it's translated on the website into all of the 7 languages that come with the website. The 800-page book is not translated. We are working on translating the key portions of it, but a lot of it is numbers and data, so it doesn't necessarily have to be translated.
And knowing what we've learned through COVID-19 and what's been happening here, language access, and it's not just around translation, it's really about being culturally competent and being able to speak in ways that people can actually understand it. We focus a lot of the conversation around social distancing and flattening the curve, and we know communities, I myself had to Google it so I can understand what all of that meant. And so I'm just trying to figure out in terms of really having a cultural competency lens as it relates to language access and community engagement, wondering whether or not there would be an opportunity to expand the pie and the budget in that area.
All right, so yeah, I think the vast majority of city departments go through the language access department to get their yearly funding for what services they need, whether it's translation or community engagement or literature, or all those different things that they work on. I think from a budget perspective, the thing that we tried to focus on was getting everything to a 7th grade reading level on all of our written materials on the website. We really direct folks towards that. The budget book, in a lot of ways, is a kind of a repository for all the information you would ever need, whereas the budget website is really the highest level information written in a 7th grade English language, in an English level that's then translated into 7 languages to get that information out there. But I think we'd be certainly happy to think creatively about other ways we can get engaged. I honestly found that the best way to do it was we had a great analyst, Natasha White, who really piloted a program out in the neighborhoods to get analysts and sort of some of our core staff on the sort of the front lines to these different community meetings to kind of talk through each of the different issues. I think the one thing that always comes up is we don't fund the tea at the end of the day, or we don't pay for the tea. So that was certainly one of those areas that we're continuing to educate people.
Thank you for that. And then I have 2 questions in regards to right now we've been hearing a lot about everyone has to wear a mask if they're going to go to the supermarket, if they're going to go out. If we're thinking about what life is going to look like post COVID-19, how are we planning for that to ensure that all of the residents in the city of Boston have the tools and resources they need to protect themselves?
So I'll just stab at that one, and then you can.
Go ahead.
So I think, the chairwoman asked a good question at the beginning of this, which is sort of like, how are we planning for these costs in FY21? And I think a lot of the costs that we've experienced to date have really been somewhat one-time in nature, meaning obviously we bought a whole lot of Chromebooks that we weren't anticipating we would buy in this fiscal year. A great deal of the personal protective equipment that we are buying is obviously sort of around the surge and around the coming months. We expect that some of those purchases will continue into FY21, but I think part of the nature of this is that a lot of the upfront cost has been somewhat one-time in nature, and therefore we've been able to sort of account for it in FY20, and we'll keep a watchful eye on what we think that might mean in terms of adjustments for FY21. In terms of your question about sort of what are we doing to ensure that people have access to the gear that we need, our primary responsibility through the city budget process and city funds is ensuring that our employees have access to the equipment that they need. For certain public safety professional, that is actually the PPE, the personal protective equipment. For the rest of our City of Boston employees, those are cloth or other types of face coverings, making sure that people have access to hand washing and sanitizer and things like that. And so that we are focused on and really getting that new information out to our employees, who the vast majority are also Boston residents. We are also, through the coordinated effort of coronavirus response, working on what types of information is going out to neighborhoods. What do people need to know about why is a face covering important, and how could they make their own, and what types of material could they use, and things like that. So trying to amplify the message from both our federal partners and our state partners about what the importance of that is. And there has been a great deal of discussion about how to make sure that that is penetrating all areas of the city and all populations, because I think there is some understanding that some of the verbiage and sort of public health language that has been typically used is not penetrating well. And so how do we adjust what that communication looks like? And so that's something that we are working on in the coming days.
Thank you for that. And then 2 last things before my time is up.
Time is up, so be quick.
Oh, my time is up. Oh, okay, well then I'll just
It's okay, if you just summarize them really quickly.
Oh God, pressure. So I guess if I had to choose one or the other, my biggest ask is if we're thinking about engagement and community accessibility to public hearings, that I would really push in terms of this budget process to build in the infrastructure for real meaningful engagement. As we see that Zoom hearings are now in play, people have become more engaged I'm going to be pushing for to support the city council staff. I see that we have $39,000 that have been was receiving from last year, I guess, and I'm just hoping that we can increase that budget so that we could ensure that we're engaging all folks in these conversations. And thank you, Councilor Bach, for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Councilor O'Malley is up next, and then he'll be followed by Council President Janey and Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Justin and Emma, for your great work during these obviously unimaginably difficult times. Justin, you're forecasting 65 million of new growth for fiscal year 21, which is about a 35% decrease from this current fiscal year, which obviously makes sense given the uncertainty. What was the original forecast for FY20? Was it more? I assume it was less than the 99 million that came in.
So yeah, that's a great point. So there's two things going on. One, new growth looks back retroactively for things like construction and new buildings and all that different types of stuff. So it's actually looking at a time period before the coronavirus started to hit. I think that last year or this year, the FY20 number of 99 million was sort of unprecedented in the city's history. So I think that is a combination of some very big buildings and then a lot of private investment in personal property in the sense of utilities investing in some of the core infrastructure through their wires, through their sewer tunnels, through all the different things that we count as new growth, but is very difficult for the city to predict. I would say that because this number is retroactive looking, we saw that the economy was still strong in 2019, but we need to express a ton of conservatism going forward because the real impact on new growth is actually going to be FY22, because that number could plummet basically over the next couple of months, because that's the time period that it's going to be looking at the rest of this calendar year. So we needed to express a lot of conservatism with that, because that's going to be something that's going to trickle into the next couple of years.
Agreed. So just for my own edification, because I ask this every year, do you recall offhand what the number was for last year for new growth forecasted?
The forecasted number for FY20?
Yes.
I believe it was either 60 or 62 million.
Right. Okay. So we saw obviously a $35 million increase, recognizing a lot of factors that, but I think it reinforces your correct call in setting a lower number for next year. With the property tax delay to June 1st, and then likely we will probably, one would assume, see a record number of unpaid or property tax accounts in arrears going into which is of course the final quarter that we've delayed it a month. Has that been taken into account as you talk about sort of putting the budget together?
So I'll just take a stab at that one. So a quarterly tax payment for the city of Boston is about $650 million, obviously a huge portion of our annual revenue. The delay, as you mentioned, Councillor, from May 1 to June 1 has no impact on the budgeted number because it's still within the fiscal year. Obviously has a small cash flow impact. Cash matters to us too because we have to actually get cash out the door to do things like pay people. But we think that cash flow impact is manageable, and we'll be watching that. The city's collection rate on property taxes is 99%, and so we have a relatively strong place to start from in terms of what to the extent that collections are disrupted during an economic recession, it really is around the margins of a 99% collection rate.
Even during the Great Recession?
We'll get you some updated numbers on what that looks like in the Great Recession. And obviously the work that people are doing with mortgage companies and landlords and such is helping, I think, to offset some of that. But it's certainly a place where state law around property taxes is very specific, and the collections methods are really very clearly written and very strongly written because it is the lifeblood of cities and towns in Massachusetts. There's no other major city in the US that relies on property taxes like we do. And so that's why when we think about property taxes and dates that bills are due and what that cash flow and also budgeted number looks like, it's really important that we just consider our ability to execute on providing the services that we need to throughout this crisis as well, because the two are inextricably linked.
Great, absolutely. Justin, this slide where you talked about pilot increase about 14 million, and then I think it was I was taking copious notes, but I may have missed it. 121 ABC agreements, is that the right title or?
Yeah, so 121A agreements are sort of our non-property tax agreements with developers and others.
And that's been decreased. What was the amount?
So it was more to illustrate a trend line. So the three dates, the three numbers that we looked at, and I'd be happy to circulate the deck again, was basically since 2002, pilot agreements have basically doubled in that time period, and that's a function of sort of working with institutions, but also working with that. And then since 2002, and a high watermark in 2010, just the overall number of 121 agreements that we have dropped by about half. So we had about $61 million worth of 121 agreements in 2010. And then we are planning on about $31 million for next year. So it's really to show kind of a shift in the type of collections that we have in the city.
Fair enough. And as someone who had, came in the midst of FY11, I'm delighted to see the capital budget will have doubled in my time on that body my time on this body to nearly $3 billion. Obviously, once we get into the capital, my number one priority is Billings Field and West Roxbury. We can talk offline and get into that at the appropriate time, but it is exciting to see that increase and how important it is, particularly during what will likely be an economic downturn. Similarly, real investments in education and housing and resiliency, particularly the composting and the trees, is something that I'm very, very excited about. My last question, so my colleagues can continue, is we've been very aggressive with our pensions, with our debt services. We're looking to pay that off in 2024, 2025, is that correct? Will we need to, or will we have the opportunity, although those are fixed costs, to perhaps increase that if need be, if our biggest fears come to realization and the economy just completely is much more sluggish than we even fear? Is there an opportunity that could help be a lifeline to the city to delay payments or maybe renegotiate the extended terms for our pensions and other liabilities?
So we are in the middle of, we are paying our pension funding schedule on a schedule that was set about 2 years ago based on the last valuation. So we are in the middle now today of a new valuation that will take into account an update to many assumptions, including our market returns through the end of last calendar year and the calendar year before that. So 19 and 18, which 18 was 18 was a problematic returns year for us, and 19 was a great year. And so that information will set our new valuation and therefore schedule moving forward. It obviously does not take into account the impacts of coronavirus, and so we are going to have a discussion about what that looks like. Market returns are obviously always rolling, and so one concern when you have to do something like this is just when you snap the line. We are going to have negative impacts from coronavirus and market returns. We've already seen that. It's been, obviously awful for anybody who has any invested funds, and yet, there is time marches on and returns continue to evolve. And so you just have to be mindful of where you snap the line when we look at what those returns mean for what our schedule will look like going forward. So we will update with a new valuation and a new schedule. This year's budget numbers are based on the last schedule and the last valuation. Next year's budget should be based on the next valuation. And we will have to make a decision at that time about just what we need to do to understand the impacts of the market returns as a result of coronavirus in light of that.
I'm not suggesting at all that we delay unless it's an absolute necessity, but it does sound like the valuation would potentially affect the schedule of payment as well. I, like all of us, am excited that we are so close, literally years away from having this fully funded and fully paid for, but it sounds to me that conversations are being had to on every potential outcome that will occur from this.
Sure, I think it's our responsibility to understand what all the possible contingencies are, and that will certainly be part of our planning. We have ended the fiscal year for the past several fiscal years with an additional payment beyond our schedule to the pension fund. Now, those are nominal in terms of what our total unfunded liability is, but I think it shows our commitment to the schedule and also just helps to soften the blow a bit. And so we will continue to both, I think, hold that as a priority in terms of making sure that we can achieve the schedule. And whatever way possible. That being said, what the city of Boston is facing in terms of our returns is being felt globally, obviously, and so we will be in the same boat as everybody else in terms of figuring out how we handle that going forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor O'Malley. Council President Janey, to be followed by Councillor Asabi George and then Councillor Breeden.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Councillor Bach, for your masterful chairing of this first Ways and Means hearing. Certainly thank you to Emma and Justin for your work and to the mayor for these investments. For me, a lot of my questions continue to be around economic development, around education, as they always are. And COVID-19, I think, is really magnifying many of the challenges that we already had in our city in terms of disparities. And my questions, I guess, for the FY21 budget really is how we utilize this budget to close some of those gaps as a value statement of our city. And so I'm particularly interested in ways that we use this FY21 budget to begin some of the recovery around the economic piece with small business. I see that there is additional investment in education. Would love to understand more of what that looks like, particularly given that we know our starting point is an opportunity and achievement gap, and that gap persists and even widens depending on which data points we're looking at, especially for Black and Latino students, for students with disabilities, and students whose first language isn't English. And so I'm really interested in how we use this budget with a focus on equity to really address the existing gaps, and being mindful that COVID-19 is piling on top of those gaps and forcing some of those gaps to widen. And so on the education piece, I wish you could, and I know we'll have a series of education hearings, but if just, top level, big picture, kind of talk about what that increase is, and whether or not we have to be worried about additional spends coming up, particularly like in my mind, I'm thinking there'll be talks around summer learning opportunities that might cost additional money that we weren't anticipating because of the shutdown. And so I want to understand if this budget is reflecting those types of things on that. And then I noticed also the increase on the public health. Would like to understand how we're building up our infrastructure. So God forbid we are faced with this again, that we won't be caught off guard and that we will be better prepared. So I think I'll end that in case I have some follow-up questions based on your presentation. And then I'm looking forward to future hearings when we can really dive in and go deeper. Thank you.
So I'll take those in somewhat out of order because that's how my brain is working right now. So on the BPS side of things, I would say the headline investment of $80 million increase is really an investment in equity. I think of that new funding that we're dedicating, 36 million of it, almost all of the new investments that we've done there are going to be targeted towards our transformation schools as identified by the district. So as you may know, and as the superintendent has undertaken so far, a really robust community process around the strategic plan, and that sort of dovetailed into a need to address the structural barriers at some of our lowest performing schools. And that $36 million, that's all new services, whether they're resources for families through family liaisons in each of those schools, through additional coaching and teaching for those teachers in those schools, and then making sure that those classrooms and those learning environments are up to snuff. Those are sort of pure $36 million worth of new investments in educational equity in our lowest performing schools. So I think that is certainly something that we prioritize. On the economic development front, I would say there's three areas to focus on. We did set up the $1 million cannabis equity fund in this budget, so that is included. So as soon as life gets back to normal, though, that will funding will start being directed towards that. The other two areas I would just mention quickly around equitable procurement, because while the city is limited in our ability to fund new programs and services, we do still spend about $3.6 billion annually. So we have two new staffers, one in the A&F departments and one in economic development, to focus on implementing the new equitable procurement ordinance through both new technology and a new budgeting form and new budgeting and procurement form that those two folks will manage, but it actually is sort of a revamping of the entire structure by which we procure goods and services. So that's both from a budgeting perspective and then also from an implementation perspective. And then on economic development, I think you're exactly right. There is an evolving need around economic development that is continuing to show itself. I think Chief Barros and a lot of other folks last week, obviously working through the Small Business Fund. I think that that's the immediate way we've been able to identify it. I think they're still working through what the demand is for those services, but we know it is great. So that is certainly something that we're going to continue to find other resources for, whether it's the city budget or other, whether it's federal stimulus money or other funding that we're able to access. That is definitely top of mind, but we just don't know what that demand is yet. And then the last thing on public health, I would say a lot of the savings that we're able to identify in other departments. I know we mentioned sort of cuts across the board to sort of non-personnel budgets, small but meaningful cuts. We tried to protect the Boston Public Health Commission from, so that they have a sort of fully resourced and fully staffed emergency services department, Office of Recovery Services, and then all of the bureaus that deal with infectious disease, environmental health, youth violence, all the different types of bureaus. We felt like we needed to prioritize increasing the BPHC budget. And I think it's very tantamount that the BPHC budget is going up 9.7% or about $9 million. And the rest of city departments are basically on a whole level funded. So we think that we agree in funding a sort of fully robust public health commission in addition to the increases in education and housing.
Yep. So I would just say this. I know I'm at the end of my time, I'm sure, and I'm grateful for the investment in public health. I think that's certainly important. I want to be mindful that we have public safety departments within the city of Boston that certainly need new funding. And there have been concerns, certainly in just my short 2 years on this body, around whether we are investing enough and whether we have enough in terms of personnel for public safety officials. So I'll just end there. I know we will have the opportunity to go deeper on a number of these issues. I'm grateful again for all the work that is taking place. I think for us, this is an opportunity to continue to raise the issues of equity and making sure that we are doing everything to leverage this budget to ensure that everyone in Boston can live and thrive. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Council President. Now I'd like to call on Councillor Asabi George, followed by Councillor Breeden, and Councillor Arroyo will be next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to just start by congratulating Councillor Bach on chairing and leading us through this budget process virtually. I also want to thank the administration for their continued work, especially amid this pandemic, and Chief Handy and Director Scarrett, thank you for the work and the effort you and your teams have put into this. As a city councilor at large, I'm proud to represent the entire city of Boston and use the budget season to assess and make improvements we use the budget process to really assess and make improvements to how the city is responding to the needs and issues of all of our residents. As chair of the Committee on Education, as well as vice chair of the Committee on Public Health, as well as Ways and Means, it's incredibly important that we're responsible in ensuring that all of our resources are used responsibly, and that we're very thoughtful with our spending. And this budget presented before us today, I think, really achieves that. And I know Justin used the phrase, balanced and sustainable, and it's really important through this process that we have a balanced budget and it's a sustainable budget. So I appreciate that focus. As the city and the rest of the world navigates this global health pandemic, we've learned a lot about the city of Boston's capabilities in being prepared and responding to this emergency situation. And I appreciate at the same time, and one of my questions will be about, we're going through this budget process and we're thinking about this work that's before us, but we're also adjusting in our response to this pandemic that caught many of us unprepared. And while we're doing this and responding to the immediate crisis at hand, I am curious about the work that's being done and the investments that we're thinking about, both financial investments as well as human capital investments, and being prepared for the future. So when we think about best practices and learning, and I know Mayor Walsh has brought in a team to evaluate our work, we have to think about this process holistically. So I'm curious if there's some thoughts to that effort going forward and what investment that's going to require us as a city. And before you respond to that, as we go through this budget process, I don't think it'll be a surprise to many of you that my interests are around our investments in our schools. And as a parent, as BPS parent, as a former teacher, that's really important to me. But that we're also making sure that we're continuing to invest in creating better access to mental health services, both in response to this pandemic, but stuff that we've needed all along for our students, for our residents, for our elderly, for our first responders. And that we're also continuing to invest in the best clinicians through BPD. That'll be something I'll ask about when Boston Police is before us with their budget, with Squad 80 and Squad 80's continued efforts around their response to the opioid crisis. Because as a city, we're dealing with this pandemic, but we know that the opioid pandemic continues. So that's a quick summary of some of what my work will focus on, but I am curious about thinking not just in the here and now, but about preparing for the future. Thank you.
So I'll give it a shot, and then Emma, feel free to jump in. So I think I think we wholeheartedly agree with the notion of being prepared for what comes next. And I think when you look around to other states and other cities who are in much different financial situations because they have not been as fiscally prudent, is they're trying to, stave off layoffs and stave off furloughs and stave off really impactful service disruption. So I think our goal for the next sort of 2 months, and then ultimately starting, when the public health measures open, is going to be making sure we have a well-funded and well-running city government, because a city government that is dealing with the financial issues that others might, or layoffs or service reductions, is going to be in as much trouble, because we're also going to be dealing with starting to restart the economy and restarting society. So our goal sort of with this budget is to sort of stability and making sure we are a point of sort of a focal point for folks to look to when everything else is so unstable. So I think that's kind of the message. I think we completely agree that going forward we need to make sure our public safety is sort of funded at the level that it needs to. I think I didn't mention it in the budget, but we do have a proposal to increase the size of the sworn police force by 25 officers. Now, that may seem small, but that's a pretty big increase year over year for the city. So I think that's one of the areas that we're trying to definitely make sure is ready. And I think it's going to be a little bit of an evolving process. I think the economic development side of things, the housing side of things, and the schools are going to be in flux over the next 3 months in terms of what decisions need to be made around restarting, the economy, restarting schools, restarting housing, and how we are able to manage that. The one caveat I would say is this was a robust investment in the schools, and I think we're very proud of the investments that we made, but definitely mindful that is an ongoing discussion. On housing and the economy, we are a city at the end of the day. We are a $3 billion budget, and we do have some amount of influence, and that's why we were able to stand up the Economic Development Fund, stand up a rental fund last month. But in comparison to what the need is out there, we're going to have to be relying on our state and federal partners to come to the table with real resources in order to help us get through this. Because I don't think the city of Boston is going to be able to solve all the problems just because we're not built the same way New York City is, or Denver, where they have the types of resources available to them to really make meaningful impacts on getting things back up to speed. But we're going to do as much as we can within our kind of smaller pie.
Great, appreciate that, and thank you. And my question really emphasizes, I think, the need for us to not just plan for here and right now on a regular day in the regular budget process, but the here and right now dealing with this pandemic and this crisis, but also about future planning, and that we're prepared both for a crisis, but we're also prepared for the work that continues, because our kids will still need to go to school. Our first responders still need the equipment that they need to get through their day and respond to the needs of our residents. So I'm excited about this process. Again, congratulations to Councillor Bach, and I look forward to really getting into the weeds over the next few months on this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Asabi George. Councillor Breeden, to be followed by Councillor Arroyo and then Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. Thank you, everyone, for all your hard work on this budget. This is my first budget hearing. It is a learning curve. I am very interested and excited to learn more as we go forward through this process. I had a few questions. I wanted to get some of your opinion on the impact of the COVID crisis on the pilot program. Many of our universities are planning to defer, like BU is planning to defer the start of the school year to January 21. It's very, many foreign students are expected to maybe have difficulty returning at this point in time. Are you anticipating any sort of a pushback from the educational institutions with regard to pilot payments?
Thanks, Councillor, for the question. So I guess I would say that one, we have extended the deadline for pilot payments from institutions to June 1 to match the new property tax payment deadline to ensure that we're sort of being consistent across the board with our expectations there. I'll say, I guess, a couple of things about pilot generally. Certainly, this is, I think, unprecedented for our institutions, obviously hospitals as well as universities in terms of what they are needing to do and respond to in the moment. And so, so much of the response that the City of Boston has worked on has been in supporting their needs to get through this, and as well as understanding what supports they can give to the city. And I don't mean to pilot in that particular example, but you know, we've leveraged relationships to use dorms and are certainly looking to, in terms of how we can support hospitals and things like that. And so I think that spirit of collaboration and trying to get through this together, because we are all in it together, is certainly what is driving, I think, everyone's response across the board, across all institutions. Pilot continues to be, I think, a really important revenue source for the city. And Justin showed that very helpful slide in his presentation about how we've been able to increase what those cash payments are to the City of Boston. Those are essential to the city, and we need those to continue to come in to ensure that we do not have a budget exposure that we honestly have not planned for at this point. And so while we have pushed back the time period to ensure that, again, we are being consistent across the board with when we expect to receive those last payments, both from property taxes, but also pilot, it's really essential that revenue come in FY20 to ensure that we've maintained a balanced budget this year, and also that we maintain that level of pilot contribution into the next year, because again, it's a significant revenue source to the City of Boston. And so to not have that, or to have a major step back from that, would jeopardize our ability to, I think, provide some of the essential services that we talked about earlier. So we will continue to work with institutions to understand what they need and how we can support them. But we will certainly be continuing to press on with the pilot program and ask that institutions make those voluntary contributions consistent with what that framework suggests.
Thank you. With regard to the Age Strong and our support for elders in our neighbourhoods, we have an increasing number of retirees and an aging population at this point in time. Are there any, and these people are maybe the most vulnerable, some of the most vulnerable in this present crisis. Are there any plans to increase funding for the Age Strong Commission at this point in time? Given increased demand?
Absolutely. So the overall budget for Age Strong is going up to going up by about 6%. But there is a $200,000 investment to hire some additional staff and bring on some contracted resources to do exactly that, to basically be financial, not advisors, but basically connecting seniors who can call into Age Strong and connecting them with the type of resources that are out there already, whether it's through the state or the federal government. I think especially around housing, unemployment, Medicare, those are all big issues that are big financial decisions for a lot of people. And we're prioritizing a $200,000 investment to increase the staff at Age Strong to help folks navigate those oftentimes very complicated and burdensome systems.
Thank you. And also our small business community are absolutely getting hammered in this crisis. They will be instrumental in our recovery because they employ a lot of folks in the neighbourhoods. Is there a proactive plan to put some money into increasing, get those folks up, get those businesses up and going again?
So I think the entire sort of Chief Barros and the entire Economic Development Cabinet has small businesses at the top of their list right now. Like I think that the vast majority of their resources on an annual basis go towards small businesses. This would sort of be a very much of a focusing on it. I think we're learning a lot right now from the small business fund that was released a week or two ago, I can't remember, about what the demand is out there. And we're going to sort of dedicate as many of our resources as we can to that fund. The challenge is, and much like housing, we're trying to solve a very big problem with sort of a limited number of tools in our tool belt. And we really need to look to the state and federal government for stimulus support at some point to help support them even more.
I think I've probably used all my time, but is that, how am I doing for time?
I'm afraid you have, yes.
That's fine. Go ahead. That's grand. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor Breeden. Councillor Arroyo now, followed by Councillor Baker, and then Councillor Wu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think one of the things about going close to last is a lot of people have covered territory that I expected to cover, so this will probably be a little quicker. I guess one of my questions is, we moved the property tax collection to June 1st. What impact, if any, does that have on the budget and or our bond rating analysis? And what happens if we have to push that further back?
Yeah, great question. Quarterly tax payment for the city of Boston is about $650 million on our, $3.4 billion base in FY20. So the reason I think that the state chose to move it from May 1 or April 1 in some circumstances to June 1 is because it will not affect cities and towns' budgeted revenue numbers by moving it back that 1 month. It is really a cash flow issue. So the revenue will still come in the current fiscal year. And instead it is about sort of how much cash do we have on hand to pay our liabilities, first and foremost, which is just payroll of our city employees, which we are obviously continuing to do through this crisis. And so it has no budget impact on us for now. If it was pushed out into the next fiscal year, it would have a catastrophic budget impact on us. We cannot absorb a hit of $650 million. We don't have, that doesn't, it far exceeds our reserves that we have on hand. There's really nothing that we could do to absorb a impact of a missed property tax payment as a whole to the city of Boston. But a move of 1 month within the existing fiscal year is something that we are able to absorb from a cash perspective. That may not be true for every city and town in Massachusetts. And so I don't have data today on exactly how many people have taken up that flexibility granted by the state. But for us, we were able to do it for that 1 month and ensure the continuity of our operations, regardless of whether that came in May or June.
And so does that mean that the June 1st is basically a hard stop? We couldn't move it past that if we had to?
I think that's true. So the end of the fiscal year is June 30th. So by making it June 1st, you really give people that full month to get their payment in. Obviously it's still late if it's beyond June 1st, but it gives us that time to ensure that the payment is received in the fiscal year.
Thank you. And then on the rainy day fund, obviously the rainy day fund impacts our bond ratings. Do we have a set percentage or amount that's required to be in the rainy day fund to maintain our current rating? And what would that ratio be? How much space essentially do we have there?
That's a great question. There is no hard and fast rule with the rating agencies. They like to see somewhere in the sort of 5 to sort of 10% range at a minimum. The state has about 5%, maybe a little bit more. We're at about 11% right now of our funds. So any impact would kind of put us down into a territory where we would start to take a look at what we have, but it's certainly, we feel good about where we are right now. But I think to Emma's point earlier in the meeting, anytime you plan to take funding out of the rainy day fund, it sends up red flags with rating agencies because it basically means something's off track. And while we do that so that we can fix it when it does go off track, it is an area that we like to avoid because we're going to have to explain it to rating agencies why we did it.
Thank you. Those are kind of my big overarching budget questions right now. I'll get into more of the detailed stuff later, but my major focus is probably going to be on our transportation infrastructure, specifically in District 5. We have some big projects coming. I know that it's been noted to me that even though we have been planning a High Park Avenue corridor kind of project. There's no funding in for it. I think the state is essentially funding the study for it, but we haven't funded any of the potential work there, like the bus lanes or anything like that. So that'll be something I'd be looking at. And then I echo Councillor Flaherty on receiving calls from our health centers. I know Mattapan Health Center, I've been in close communication with them, and they've been struggling fiscally. So that's definitely going to be a focus for me as well. I appreciate the work you all doing. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate how everybody's been kind of working remotely, and this is kind of a moving target with everything that's happening right now.
Thank you, Councillor Arroyo. Councillor Baker now, to be followed by Councillor Wu and then Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Emma, so you had talked a little bit about our OPEB. So if the market doesn't perform, or we don't think the market is going to perform, will that cause our I think we do 40 million a year towards our pension? Will we need to pay more to stay on track, or do we just keep that 40 million and maybe it gets pushed out a couple of years? Is that based on the performance of the market?
So we are on a firm funding schedule for pension, and yes, market performance will impact eventually whether what that time period is and or what our annual commitment needs to be to stay on track for the 2025 time period. For OPEB, we are not yet on a schedule to fund OPEB. We do, I think, have made great progress on OPEB just through, as Justin mentioned, $40 million of our reserves every year are planned for OPEB. Many cities and towns and even states are sort of not even yet at the point where they are investing in tackling their OPEB liability. It's sort of the next great liability tackled once municipal governments get up to speed on pension. But because we, I think, for a long time have been responsibly managed pension, we've also, over many, many years, been contributing this $40 million annually to sort of make a down payment on what we know we will need to do on OPEB in the future. So that market returns certainly impact our overall liability on OPEB, but they don't necessarily in the near term impact how much we will need to fund OPEB, if that makes any sense. So on pension, they may, although it will be some time until we see the impacts of that in our schedule. And on OPEB, that sort of when that shows up for us is a little bit farther out because of where we are on our funding for that.
Thank you. And one of the questions that I had was about what will be cut out in this year's budget, and I think you answered it, Emma. It's more new investments, so we can expect basically the same service that we had last year.
So yeah, I think Justin did a good job explaining that really the things that we had to pare back on were sort of the level of investment. Many of the investments that are in the budget before you today would have been of a greater magnitude if we had continued to have the resources that we originally anticipated as we were planning the budget. And, you know, I'll say it, I'm sure 100 times during the course of this process. This is, I think, what we expect as of today, and we are closely monitoring revenue and what sort of unintended consequences the coronavirus response and economic impact might have on our ability to perform services. The budget today does not include reductions to service or layoffs or things like that. We will obviously be working closely with you all through the next few months to understand where things are headed, and to the extent that anything takes a turn, we will certainly be in contact so that we can adjust as we see we need to. But I think the budget today is baseline of the services that were provided last year, plus those additional investments primarily around education and housing and some of the other items that I think Councillor Edwards and some other folks mentioned that sort of were commitments that the mayor and the city council have made at some point over the past year that are now reflected in our planning for next fiscal year.
So we could shift some of that money. What about if we got to the fall? Would there ever be discussions around layoffs? Or do you think the people that are in the system now this year will be safe until next year?
So as of now, we do not see the need to do layoffs. As you know, I think we have made a great deal of adjustment to our workforce today to ensure that we are able to promote social distancing. A great number of our city employees are partially or fully working from home today. And for our employees that continue to be necessary as frontline employees, we have implemented a number of shift, I should call it rotating of shifts and things like that, so that we can ensure greater social distancing. But we haven't been sure to enable people to continue to get paid through the course of this, and are continuing to leverage our workforce. Even if they are remote, they are doing their jobs. They're just doing them in the same way that we all are today, from behind a screen at home, or from the front line, but in an adjusted schedule or something like that. And as I mentioned, we don't see a need for layoffs either in FY20, and looking ahead to FY21, there are none in this budget. I think the concerning thing about this particular economic crisis is that it is certainly unprecedented, of course, in our lifetime, but for a long time before that as well. And so it is difficult for us to have a full grasp of exactly what this will mean for us. The backward-looking nature of our property tax numbers helps to insulate us a little bit from that uncertainty, but certainly there's every week that goes by, I think we learn new information about what the impacts are of coronavirus, what the curve will look like, and when we think, society sort of restart. And so that has a huge impact on our budget planning.
Thank you. Justin, I numbered it at page 34, the debt affordability. That 7% marker, is that for us to stay under, and then we know if we stay under, is that borrowing, or what the cost of our money is?
That is how much, sorry, can you hear me? Yeah.
Go ahead, yep.
That 7% number is how much of the city's total budget we can use to borrow money from, basically. So in this year, 2021, we're going to borrow about $210 million in order to fund the capital plan. The 7% number basically grows over time as the rest of the city budget grows over time. So we're able to add new general obligation bond funding over the next 5 years, and it gets us up to a place that still keeps us underneath that 7% threshold. But that 7% is referring to how much of the city's operating budget we can dedicate towards debt service.
Okay, thank you. And we had established that property tax makes up 72% of our budget. It's concerning that we're talking about a transfer fee up the State House as future revenues, when honestly, I don't think the transfer tax is going to pass. So what happens when that does not pass? Are we still going to stay true to those commitments?
So what the city has in its ability to fund is right now the $100 million worth of city money that we committed to the $500 million, right? So just refresher, $100 million of city money, and then $400 million of transfer tax and Lafayette Garage. The FY21 budget has the sort of first down payment of that $100 million from the city coffers, and it's about $16 million between the capital plan and the operating budget plan. So we feel good about that. What we can't do, and what we haven't done yet, and to Councilor Clarity's point earlier, is we haven't ramped that up to get up to the full $500 million over the next 5 years, because we don't have the transfer tax and we have not sold Lafayette Garage. Those are two conversations that are going to sort of dictate whether we can sort of meet that $500 million commitment. But the city's commitment of our own resource of $100 million, we are on track to do that with this budget.
Okay, because I think we have to be very careful about going into people's pockets, especially in this next 2 years when people aren't going to want to come here and build. We're going to have to figure out ways to keep the building going, and I think things like transfer taxes will not help us. And that's it on that. And I like is it 1.5 million for tree maintenance?
Yeah, I think it's sorry, I'll pull it up. It's a $1.5 million increase. I think it's $2.5 million total that we added to the capital plan for tree plantings. We also have about a $500,000 investment in the Parks Department to maintain said trees when we plant them, because that's as important as planting them is making sure that they stay alive and they stay healthy.
What about existing trees?
Yeah, so that's the entire tree portfolio we have. So that's both sort of the maintenance and the watering of our existing trees, and then also pruning and maintenance of our urban wilds and our urban forests, because it's everything. We got to plant and we got to build we got to maintain as many trees as possible in order to hit some of our carbon goals around climate ready Boston.
Yeah, and I saw a plan for a compost pilot. And again, I think we should be looking at building rail compost infrastructure in the city of Boston. I think it's the only way that we can have surety in our costs moving into the future, because if it's $2 now on a contract, it's going to be $12 in 2 years. So we should definitely be looking at building our own infrastructure for that composting. Is there any plan around that, or will that just be another contract?
So the current plan, and this is still an iterative process that we are working through right now, would contract with someone to pick up and dispose of compost in the city in a much more aggressive way than we had been envisioning before. I think the amount of funding we have in there would cover about 1,000 households, which would be much more than we're doing currently, and sort of, because right now it's all done on the private side. I think it is, however, an evolving concept of what the final vision of what composting looks like. I think very much at the outset, it has to be around education and getting people used to composting, because right now it's a lot of people just aren't familiar with it. So we need to kind of build a customer base, as you will, and then we need to then work with either internal or external partners to scale it up. And this first year is really about education and getting some testing done to make sure that people are going to do, and then we will sort of transition into what's the most efficient way to do it. And it may be a city resource that does it, or is it a private company, or is it some combination of the two? So I think the first year is very much education, pilot, and then moving forward will be what's the most efficient way to do this.
And do we have a sense of where that composting is going?
I don't currently. We haven't. We have a bid on the street to do a smaller pilot. I think we are still working with other people on what that final version is.
Okay, I'm sure my time's up. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Wu, followed by Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for running such a great first hearing for this budget season. I apologize, I had to jump out a little bit in the middle, so let me know if this has been covered, and I'm happy to just watch the tape and get the answers. I just wanted to start, I have two questions. One is on the timing. So obviously a lot of what we will experience in terms of the budget impacts will come in later years, or we won't know until a little bit further down the line what the kind of federal support might look like. At what point, what are the kind of major milestones that will help clarify the sort of scale of what the city budget might have to absorb?
I'll sort of take a stab, and then Emma, feel free to jump in. I think there's two questions. When do we get back to sort of quote unquote normal? And when we say that is sort of the public health measures being lifted in the city, right? Or being lifted in some fashion that we get back to regular business. And then what does that new normal look like post COVID-19 in the businesses who are either unable to open or are opening in different capacities? I think the first milestone is really dependent on the public health guidance we get from the CDC. I think this budget assumes that we get back to some normal in FY21, and the areas that are most impacted by that are excise taxes and probably state revenues. So those two are very much dependent on the CDC and the sort of city Public Health Commission and the state guidelines around when we can reopen the economy. The question we won't know until sort of later down the line is what that new normal looks like, and sort of what is the new baseline level of revenue that we're collecting, because either businesses have closed, or some businesses have grown and some businesses have shrunk. That's really going to be a moving target. The big, but those are really concentrated on our smaller revenue sources. The big revenue impact that we may see would be in the 2022 budget around new growth, because that will look back at this time period for construction and building. And that's something that we're not going to know until next year at this time.
Yeah, I would just add to that sorry, Councillor, that on property taxes, since that is the I think main source of funding for the budget, obviously, and I think the reason why FY21 is relatively stable, that I would echo FY22 as being the year where that we will have more information that feeds the sort of statutorily set analysis of what those property taxes look like, specifically around, I think, the summer real estate calendar this summer, and where we are in terms of emerging from sort of self-quarantining, restrictions on businesses. It will, I think we will have some interesting, at least anecdotal data, if not more than that, this summer about what is happening to real estate transactions, because those will directly impact the underlying analysis that the city assessing department will do to set the property tax information for FY22. I know you all are hearing from the Commissioner of Assessing after this, and so I'm sure he could speak about that in much greater depth, but there are, I think, a few things coming up over the course of the next few months that are going to start to give us an insight in terms of what we can expect for the following fiscal year. And just to add to Justin's point about revenues that are sort of that we receive through the state, we get those quarterly, and so we will be obviously looking at those quarterly payments to see what they tell us about what to expect and where we're headed.
Okay. Thank you both. My second question kind of follows now based on your answers. It was about the intersection of our public health budget considerations, and then when the economy, basically that we have an influence in when we might open up. And, I would encourage everyone, I think this is the conversations that Councilors Arroyo and Mejia and I especially have been having as we're thinking about how to plan for our hearing order, our hearing on inequitable recovery and how to start that conversation, that it won't necessarily be just one, back to quote unquote normal, and what does that normal look like, but likely several phases of normal, depending on, where we are in the various peaks and how confident we feel that testing and or contact tracing is effective. So it's not just the impacts on, excise and state support, but also when there will stop being kind of this extraordinary need for cities to step into the void because there is so much financial instability on the kind of general societal level. And the more that the city, for example, if the city were to invest more resources in staffing up for testing, widespread testing and contact tracing, maybe that would allow us to feel more comfortable opening up the economy sooner to a certain degree, not open, but at least more businesses open and people still following certain social distancing, physical distancing requirements. So how have you thought about that interaction of, not just what we have to spend for the Public Health Commission to be doing more, but is there a kind of feedback loop where we are setting timelines for how we open up in different phases that then will maybe lessen the pressure on the city budget because we're also allowing the economy to kind of come back a little bit too?
Well, I'll just start and then I'll turn to Justin, who can probably speak much more eloquently on this. But I think the one thing that is really characterized the economic impacts of coronavirus that every financial expert that you will read is saying, right, is this is a public health emergency that has created a financial crisis, and that we will not be able to address the financial crisis without, exactly as you said, Councillor, addressing the underlying public health emergency. And so all of the actions that the City of Boston has taken in terms of decision-making around staffing and programs has been at the guidance of public health, whether it be BPHC, state DPH, or CDC. And so we are very much, I think, taking our cues from what that guidance looks like and figuring out really day to day and week to week at this point what we need to do to be responsive to the ever evolving facts on the ground in terms of what this looks like for Boston. And so I think certainly whatever the path forward looks like, public health guidance will be at the heart of that, because I think that that's why we are where we are. And so much of what we will need to do when we are emerging from this is figure out, by letting the public health guidance lead, what is the economic impact of that, and where does the city have a role in addressing that, and where do we need to lean on our partners at the state and the federal government to come in and help because of a scale that is really just not a service that is something that municipal government can provide. Justin, what did I miss?
No, I think that's exactly right. The only thing I would, and sorry, I always pivot back to what I know. So the city revenue that we are projecting for next year assumes a staggered opening over the first 6 months of FY21. Basically, it assumes, X% of meals tax is collected in July, and then that kind of ramps up over time. Now, that is a projection based on, really just trying to get a baseline sort of conservatism involved in the process, and we're going to be able to adjust that over the coming months, sort of as we get towards the resubmission. That does not take into account, I think, your point, Councillor, about what type of investments we would need to make to either hit or improve upon those revenue collections. And that's something that we're very open to discussing with both the Public Health Commission and the Council about where are targeted investments we can make to shore up our revenue collection for next year, or keep us on a schedule that sort of balances the economic and public health needs in a way that, I think, to Emma's point, always puts the public needs first, but where can we supplement it in a safe way to get businesses back up and running?
Thank you both. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wu. Councillor Campbell, you have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you. That's Aiden in the background screaming, so if you hear him, he's saying hello. But thank you guys for the presentation. Thank you for your hard work, and I hope you guys and your families are safe and healthy. Most of my questions were asked and answered, and so I will wait to ask my questions during specific budget hearings with respect to larger education, of course, public safety agencies, our community health centers, that's come up quite a bit, also our small businesses. So I'll just wait and do it during those times, and then I can just email any other questions, just to be respectful of you guys' time. So thank you, and thank you, Councillor Bach, and congratulations on your first hearing.
Thank you so much, Councillor Campbell. And thank you also to Emma and Justin for staying through the full round of council questions. Folks know that we have another hearing that was scheduled for noon. Obviously, the start time of that's been pushed back. Before we move to that, I do want to take I'll just say to councilors that I'm hoping that people can hold further questions for the rest of our hearings, just so that we can continue on that schedule. I'm going to first just go to public testimony from Pam Kocher from the BMRB, the Boston Municipal Research Bureau, whom I've just admitted to this. And while she's getting logged on, I just want to say for folks watching at home that I mentioned this up at the top, but we're actually having a public testimony hearing this Thursday at 6 p.m. That's going to be explicitly focused on kind of, what are people's questions for this process going forward, things that you're hoping the council will raise and dig into. So I would encourage folks to mark that on your calendar. And also we'll be taking further public testimony in the hearing to follow with assessing. But now that she's on, I'm going to recognize Pam Kocher from the Boston Municipal Research Bureau. Pam, are you there?
I am.
Great. We can't see you, just so you know. But
is that intentional, or shall I put it on? There we go. Good morning. Hi, my name is Pam Kocher. I'm the president of the Boston Municipal Research Bureau, and I'm also a city resident. Many thanks to the City Council, to the Walsh administration, and to city employees for all you are doing for our community, particularly at this uncertain and challenging time. Thank you, Chairman Bach, and members of the Ways and Means Committee for this opportunity to speak to the administration's proposed fiscal year 21 budget and the context in which you approach this budget season. You've already heard many budget numbers from Budget Director Justin Sterrett. And so I'll be speaking to a few highlights related to those numbers and also the perspective and the approach that the Research Bureau is taking as we think about the current crisis. So a couple of things initially, as you all are just very much aware of the rapid change that has happened, the extent of the change that has happened so rapidly, and the dramatic results that we've seen, particularly around unemployment in our community and broader. We know that the longer this public health crisis lasts, the greater the impact on city finances, particularly as we seek to address the impacts on our community now and in the coming years. The first question that we're thinking about, or step one of this process, under how long the uncertainty will last, is when will life get back to normal? And clearly the first thing that needs to happen is that COVID-19 will no longer be a risk to the general population. and the public health crisis will be officially declared over. Step two is, of course, then people in the community feeling comfortable to return to in-person shared activities, and that includes school, work, and community engagement. But the big question, as we're already speaking to how to address it, the big question is how much of those activities will resume and how soon. Some of the things that we are thinking about as we look at what happens when people are able to resume work and those activities. How many people will be worse off than they were before? How many people in our community who lost employment during the pandemic will be able to regain those jobs, and when? And what will the quality of jobs that people are able to get after the crisis, what will the quality look like? And as well, how many people in our community have experienced increased food insecurity or housing insecurity, and will they be able to recover from those challenges quickly, and when? And then as well, how many people in our community who didn't have those types of security before are perhaps even less likely to achieve food and housing and other types of well-being security after we so-called return to normal? We are hearing today how the city plans to address those needs. We agree it's very important for the city to be looking at that both in terms of fiscal year 20, fiscal year 21, 22, and possibly beyond. And as Justin Starrett mentioned, you all are looking to do very much that. I want to speak just a little bit to city revenue. As mentioned, the city has seen consistent revenue growth from a variety of sources in recent years, driven by the strong local economy. The Research Bureau believes that overall, the city has been a good steward of those resources by making investments in our city for today and for long-term sustainability. So the city can do what it needs to do and wants to do now and going forward. But again, there's always that caveat. This is unprecedented, uncharted waters for all of us, even including the best economists, state, locally, and nationally. We do appreciate the city's continued commitment to long-term financial sustainability and investments, including the intention to fully fund the pension system by 2025, if at all possible. That 2025 schedule, that end date of 2025, was affirmed during the Great Recession, and the city will benefit greatly if it can continue to retain that commitment. Doing so will free up city resources to meet retiree healthcare costs and other long-term commitments. And then further, we note the dynamics of capital project funding allows the city to move forward with key projects, even in challenging economic times. Those projects, of course, include Build BPS, Go Boston 2030, the transportation projects, and climate resiliency. And we support the city increasing their borrowing at closer to the 7% debt affordability cap in order to take advantage of those capital investments during this time. What we're looking for in terms of state impact on the city, a number of things, particularly state finances impacting state aid for Boston. We know that now the state leaders are going to be revisiting their state revenue assumptions that were originally made back in early December, and the results of that analysis may well impact state aid to cities and towns. We're also keeping in mind the impact on lottery revenue, which is traditionally a source of support for state aid to cities and towns. About the state implementation of the Student Opportunity Act and whether the state will be making its full commitment to get that funding underway in fiscal year 2021. We're also thinking about the impact on the sales tax, given that it supports state funding for local school building programs, and also keeping in mind that we've got Build BPS and much school renovations and building to do. We recognize that the mayor's budget resubmission in June will be an opportunity to adjust given state and local challenges. As we think about federal resources and the challenges and potential there for the city of Boston, we wonder, as we've already discussed today, what happens if the feds and the state can't step up to the degree we need to, and if so, how can the city address continued challenges or increasing challenges? We know that during the Great Recession, the federal response for cities and towns included substantial financial resources, including funds focused on infrastructure initiatives and education. And so we'd certainly hope to see such substantial investments from the federal government in the coming weeks, months, years. So as we wrap this up, there's so much recovery work ahead, and I think back to Hurricane Sandy and the conversations about the recovery that had to happen because of that. Some of it was infrastructure, some of it was people putting their lives back together. And so I'm thinking in that context of that kind of crisis as we look at an economic crisis and how that restarts. How the work goes to restart the economy, the investments we and our state and federal partners are able to make are clearly going to impact how close the economy returns to what it was pre-pandemic. We ask that the City Council keep in mind a couple of key dynamics. We need to be vigilant about monitoring and responding to public health and economic impacts on our community, obviously, and think about both this moment of crisis and potential long-term effects of this crisis on the coming fiscal years, as well as our immediate challenges. And I appreciate that there's been so much conversation about all of these aspects of the challenge to date as the City Council has talked this through with the administration. And then just in closing, we do look forward to discussions on the details of this budget and approaches to addressing the city's challenges as we go through the upcoming series of budget hearings with city departments. Thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. And please forgive me, Pam, for mispronouncing your last name.
Even notice.
All right. Does anyone have any questions for now? All right. Seeing none, thank you so much for that testimony.
Thanks very much for your time, everyone.
And we do have one more person in the waiting room for public testimony, so I'm going to allow Mark to testify. And then, as I said, we'll be moving on to the next hearing. Mark, if you could identify yourself, your affiliation or residence, and speak for 2 minutes, that would be great. Mark, are you there? All right. I'll wait for one more minute just to see if he all right, I think Marcus dropped off, so we're now going to conclude this hearing, seeing no further public testimony. Again, I'll just remind folks that there is a City Council budget website, which provides a list of the hearings that we're going to be having and also ways for you to get involved with public testimony. So we are taking videos that people record to ccc.wm@boston.gov. You can also send written testimony, or you can come to one of these future hearings and testify live. We're really looking forward to public involvement in this whole process. I want to thank the administration again for kicking this off. We're going to be going next to the hearing with the assessor's office and talking more granularly about revenue and the property tax side of things. So it's 12:38 right now. I'll be gaveling that hearing in at, I think we better say 12:50, so in 12 minutes, just to give everybody a minute to take a break. So look forward to seeing councilors on that afternoon session, and thank you again, everybody, for your time. This hearing is now adjourned.
Kenzie, we can just stay on, correct?
Hi, counselors. There is a different Zoom link for the next hearing.